I looked my sister in the eye and handed her the champagne glass I knew was poisoned. It wasn't because I wanted to hurt her. It was because it was the only way to prove to 200 guests that the real monster wasn't me. My name is Brenda Montgomery, and the last time I stood in this house, the air was thick with the scent of gardenias and betrayal. The crystal champagne flute felt cold against my skin, a stark contrast to the boiling rage hidden behind my polite smile. My father, Arthur Montgomery, a man whose portrait hung in the Savannah Historical Society, raised his own glass. His voice, a familiar baritone that commanded boardrooms and terrified his children, boomed across the manicured lawn. To my eldest, Brenda, this special vintage is just for you. I saw it then, the almost imperceptible nod between him and my mother, Dorothy, a silent confirmation of a plan years in the making. That single gesture confirmed everything I had discovered. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat beneath the calm facade. I took the glass, feeling the weight of their expectations, their cruelty, their greed. Then, I turned to my sister. "Beverly," I said, my voice cutting through the polite chatter. "This special champagne Dad selected just for me? I want you to have it. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, a ghost at your own celebration, just type the name of the city you're watching from in the comments. I want to see how far this story of finding your voice reaches. This isn't just one of those family revenge stories. It's about taking back a life they tried to steal." That single moment, that champagne glass handed to my sister, wasn't the start of the story. It was the final move in a chess game I didn't even know I was playing until the checkmate was inches from my throat. To understand why I did what I did, you have to understand the Montgomerys of Savannah, Georgia. You have to walk through the wrought iron gates of our home on Forsyth Park, a place the tourist magazines called a historic gem. But for me, it was a gilded cage, each of its 22 rooms furnished with priceless antiques and suffocating expectations. My father believed our family name was a brand, more valuable than the real estate empire worth over $500 million that backed it. Our lives weren't meant for living. They were meant to be curated for public consumption. Every charity ball, every church service, every smiling family portrait was a performance. Behind the ionic columns and the sweeping verandas, the silence was a disease. Love wasn't given freely. It was a transaction, a reward for compliance. And I was never compliant. That night wasn't just about a glass of champagne. It was about a lifetime of being told my worth was conditional. Have you ever lived in a picture-perfect prison where the smiles were for the cameras and the whispers were like knives? If you know what that feels like, just hit that subscribe button. This is a safe space for those of us who survived the pretty lies. Let me take you back inside those walls. My father, Arthur Montgomery, was a man carved from Georgia granite and ambition. Standing at 6'3", he had a presence that could silence a room the moment he entered. To the city of Savannah, he was a philanthropist, a titan of industry who single-handedly restored the historic district. To me, he was a critic whose approval was a currency I could never seem to earn. I remember him once adjusting my posture at a formal dinner, his fingers digging into my shoulder blade, whispering, "A Montgomery does not slouch. It suggests weakness." He wasn't just raising a daughter, he was grooming an asset for the family brand. My mother, Dorothy, was his perfect partner, a master of passive aggression disguised as Southern charm. She never raised her voice. She didn't have to. Her power lay in a perfectly timed sigh of disappointment or a comment like, "Oh, Brenda, honey, that dress is certainly a choice." Her love was a labyrinth of unspoken rules and impossible standards. Our home felt less like a house and more like a museum dedicated to the Montgomery legacy. Every surface was polished to a mirror shine, every family portrait meticulously staged. We had a formal living room with antique furniture, so precious we were forbidden to sit on it. It was a perfect metaphor for our family. Beautiful to look at, but cold, empty, and completely devoid of comfort or genuine warmth. This pristine environment was the stage, and on it, every family member had a role to play. And every stage needs its star. In our family, that was my younger sister, Beverly. Beverly was born with a seemingly effortless grace that I always lacked. Where my hair was a stubborn brown that resisted styling, hers was a perfect cascade of blonde curls. While I was hiding in the library, lost in books my parents deemed unsuitable, she was practicing her curtsy for the annual debutante cotillion. She was the daughter they ordered from a catalog. Beautiful, compliant, and utterly devoted to the family image. When Beverly was accepted as a legacy admission to the university my father attended, he threw a party that was covered by the society pages. When I won a national award for a piece of investigative journalism I wrote for my high school paper, he simply nodded and said, "Try not to embarrass the family name with your opinions, Brenda." Beverly learned the rules of the game early. Agree, smile, and reflect our parents' glory back at them, and you will be showered with affection and gifts. She wasn't born cruel, but she was sculpted by their expectations, molded into their perfect porcelain doll. I, on the other hand, was the constant, nagging crack in their flawless facade. It's a classic setup in these kinds of toxic family stories, isn't it? The perfect one and the problem one. Let me know in the comments, were you the one who fixed everything, or the one they were always trying to fix? Type savior if you were the fixer, or rebel if you were the problem child. I'm genuinely curious to see the balance in our community. For 18 years, I endured the comparisons, the quiet dismissals, the constant pressure to conform. Then came the time to choose my own path. The breaking point arrived, as it often does, disguised as a choice about the future. For my 18th birthday, my father didn't give me a car or a piece of jewelry. He gave me a leather-bound portfolio containing early admission application papers for Vanderbilt University's business program. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a directive. My path was preordained. Business, then law school, then a corner office managing the Montgomery Foundation's legalities. I was to be the responsible, intellectual successor, while Beverly was groomed to be the socialite face of the brand. I smiled, thanked him, and that night, I used my own savings to submit an application to Emory University in Atlanta, accepting a full academic scholarship into their social work program. When I finally told them over dinner 2 months before graduation, the silence was more violent than any shouting match. My mother's hand flew to her pearls. My father slowly placed his fork and knife down, perfectly parallel on his plate. "Social work?" he finally said, the words dripping with contempt. "You want to spend your life managing the problems of the lower classes? A Montgomery does not deal in charity cases, Brenda. We write the checks." I told him I wanted to help people, not just manage assets. His response was cold and swift. "Fine. You want to live that life, you can fund it yourself. Not another dime from this family will go towards this embarrassing crusade. Let's see how long your principles last on a waitress's salary." He truly believed he was sentencing me to failure. Instead, he had just handed me my freedom, and for 4 years, I did exactly that. I worked nights waiting tables at a diner where the grease hung in the air, and weekends shelving books in Emory's sprawling library. I lived with 3 other girls in a cramped apartment in Decatur that always smelled like ramen noodles and cheap coffee. And I had never been happier. I was free. I earned a 4 gigapascals, published a paper with one of my professors, and was accepted into a prestigious master's program on a full ride. I proved him wrong. I thrived not just without his money, but without his suffocating presence. My only contact with my parents was a stilted phone call on Christmas and my birthday. So, you can imagine my shock when, 2 weeks before graduation, my mother called, her voice dripping with an unfamiliar, syrupy sweetness. "Brenda, darling, your father and I are just so proud. We're hosting a little celebration for you back home in Savannah. The caterer is booked, and we've invited all our friends." It was a blaring red flag. They hadn't set foot on my campus once in 4 years. When I called back later to decline, my mother put the phone down on the counter, forgetting to put me on hold. I heard my father's voice, cold and sharp, speaking to their attorney on speakerphone. The Brenda liability must be contained before her 25th birthday. The trust sound mind clause is our only leverage. The party will provide the perfect public setting to document her instability. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a party, it was an ambush. The trust sound mind clause. The phrase echoed in my head for hours, a chilling piece of a puzzle I couldn't yet see. I knew I needed answers, and I knew there was only one person I could trust. My childhood friend, Nancy, who is now a paralegal intern at a firm in Atlanta. I called her, my voice trembling as I recounted the snippet of the conversation I'd overheard. I didn't know what I was asking for, just that the words felt like a death sentence. Nancy, ever practical and fiercely loyal, told me to hold on. She called me back 2 hours later, her voice low and serious. Brenda, I dug into the probate records from when your grandfather passed. It's all public record if you know where to look. She took a deep breath. Your maternal grandfather, Thomas Rowan, bypassed your parents. He set up an irrevocable trust for you and Beverly, set to be released on your 25th birthdays. Brenda, the total value is $50 million. I nearly dropped the phone. $50 million. The catch, she continued, is a standard sound mind and judgment clause. The trustees have to sign off. And guess who has the power to appoint and influence that panel? Your father. Suddenly, 2 decades of being called unstable, emotional, and difficult made perfect, horrifying sense. It wasn't just criticism. It was a long-term strategy. They weren't just trying to control me. They were laying the groundwork to steal my inheritance. Have you ever had a gut feeling, a deep-seated suspicion that something was wrong, only to find out the truth was 1,000 times worse than you imagined? If you've ever had to trust your instincts against the people you were supposed to trust most, just hit the like button on this video. It's a silent nod to all the truth seekers out there. I now understood the motive. Next, I had to find the weapon. I knew I had to go to that party. Running away would only be a temporary solution. They would just find another way. My only chance was to walk straight into the lion's den, but I had to do it with my own set of claws. I drove to Savannah the day before the party, putting on my best performance as the dutiful daughter returning to the fold. My mother, of course, immediately tried to put me in my place. Brenda, darling, be a dear and run across town to pick up the cocktail napkins from the engraver. They spelled Montgomery with one M on the last batch. The horror. It was a classic Dorothy power move, a pointless, demeaning errand. It was also the opportunity I was waiting for. I drove my car around the block, parked, and slipped back into the house through the garden entrance. I went straight to my father's study, the one room that was always kept locked. The safe was hidden behind a portrait of his grandfather. The combination? The founding date of the Montgomery real estate empire. He'd made us memorize it as children, a constant reminder of the legacy we were meant to serve. Inside, my hands shaking, I found a leather-bound folder with my initials on it. It wasn't a bomb, but it might as well have been. Inside was a forged psychiatric evaluation diagnosing me with severe emotional instability, articles on the amnestic effects of potent sedatives, and a fully drafted legal petition to have me declared mentally incompetent, granting Arthur Montgomery full conservatorship over my affairs. It was all there, a premeditated plot to destroy my life. I didn't take the file. Instead, I took out my phone and photographed every single page. I closed the safe, the quiet click echoing in the silent room. The fear was gone, replaced by something cold and hard as steel. The party was no longer their ambush. It was my courtroom. I walked into that party feeling like an actress on opening night. The air, heavy with the humid Savannah heat, smelled of gardenias and expensive perfume. A string quartet played softly near the fountain, a perfect soundtrack for the lies being told all around me. I smiled, I accepted congratulations on a degree they openly despised, and I hugged people who had judged me my entire life. All the while, I was scanning, observing, waiting. I positioned myself near the French doors leading to the kitchen, partially hidden by a large potted fern. From there, I watched my father. He was in his element, the charming patriarch, laughing with a state senator, clapping a business partner on the back. But his eyes, they were restless. They kept darting towards the catering staff, then to me, then back again. And then I saw it. He intercepted a young server carrying a fresh tray of champagne. He guided the man to a secluded corner of the patio, thinking he was hidden by the dusk. I saw him pull a tiny vial from his blazer pocket, the kind used for eye drops. With a quick, practiced movement, he uncapped it and emptied the clear, viscous liquid into a single glass one with a delicate gold rim that set it apart from the others. The liquid vanished into the bubbles. He leaned in and whispered to the server, his voice a low command I could just barely hear. The one with the gold rim. For my daughter, Brenda. Only her. If you believe that the truth, no matter how ugly, always deserves to be brought into the light, just type the word evidence in the comments below. Let's create a space where seeing the truth is always validated. The server nodded, his face impassive, and began to walk towards me, carrying my destruction on a silver tray. The curtain was going up on their final act. They just didn't realize I had rewritten the script. Just then, my father's voice cut through the air, amplified by a sense of self-importance. Everyone, if I could have your attention. The string quartet quieted. Guests turned, their faces expectant. He guided me to the center of the patio, my mother and Beverly flanking us. It was a perfectly staged family portrait. The server with the silver tray approached. My father personally lifted the gold-rimmed glass, his smile as wide and false as a politician's. A special vintage, he announced, holding the glass out to me. For a special daughter on her special day. As I reached for it, I held up my hand. Thank you, Dad. Before we drink, I'd just like to say something. His smile tightened. This was not in his script. I turned to the crowd. I want to thank my parents for teaching me the value of legacy and the importance of protecting the family at all costs. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Then I turned to my sister, whose face was a mixture of boredom and impatience. But most of all, I want to honor the person who truly embodies the Montgomery spirit. My sister, Beverly. I stepped towards her, extending the glass. Her eyes widened in surprise. This special champagne, this symbol of my accomplishment, is mine to share. And I want to share it with you, Beverly. A toast, from me to you. Panic, stark and visceral, flashed across my father's face. Brenda, that's not. My mother lunged forward slightly. Darling, she has her own. But it was too late. Beverly, basking in what she perceived as a moment of public adoration, had already set down her old glass and taken the gold-rimmed one from my hand with a triumphant smile. I'd be honored, Beverly declared, her smile wide for the audience. She took a long, theatrical sip from the gold-rimmed glass. It's delicious, Daddy. What vintage is? She stopped mid-sentence. Her perfect smile faltered, replaced by a look of confusion. That's odd. It tastes bitter underneath. Seconds passed that felt like an eternity. A flush crept up her neck, her face turning a blotchy red. She blinked hard, her pupils suddenly wide and dark in the patio lights. I feel dizzy, she slurred, pressing a hand to her temple as her knees gave way. I was already moving, catching her before she hit the ground and lowering her into a garden chair. The party dissolved into horrified gasps and whispers. I turned to my father, and in the dead silence, my voice was a whip crack. What did you put in that drink? He rushed forward, trying to control the narrative. She's sensitive to alcohol. An allergic reaction. She's had champagne at every holiday for 5 years. I yelled back. Just then, Dr. Peterson, our family physician, pushed through the crowd. He knelt by Beverly, checked her pulse, and looked at her eyes. His face hardened. This isn't an allergic reaction. This is poisoning. Someone call 911. Now. As sirens began to wail in the distance, I looked my father dead in the eye. It was meant for me, wasn't it? The perfect way to handle the Brenda liability. The perfect facade of the Montgomery family shattered in less than 30 seconds. It was terrifying, and it was justice. If this moment of raw, unfiltered truth hit you as hard as it hit them, don't forget to hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that these stories of survival and vindication need to be heard. The party was officially over. The next 12 hours were a blur of police statements and the sterile, antiseptic smell of the hospital. I sat in a hard plastic chair beside Beverly's bed while they monitored her vitals. When she finally woke, her eyes, hazy from the sedatives and the pumping of her stomach, focused on me with pure venom. You, she rasped, her voice raw. You did this. You couldn't stand that it was my party, my moment, so you had to ruin it. You hate me. For a moment, the old dynamic flared, the ingrained rivalry. Her words were designed to provoke. But I refused to play the part. I didn't argue. I simply took out my phone. He did this, Beverly, I said quietly. And he did it for $50 million. I showed her the first photo, the forged psychiatric report branding me as unstable. I swiped to the next, the articles on the sedative that was found in her system. Then, the petition for conservatorship. Her angry denial began to falter, confusion clouding her eyes. He was going to declare me mentally incompetent to steal my half of Grandpa's trust, I explained. And Beverly, I need you to see this. I swiped to the last photo. It was another folder, this one with her initials on it, containing a nearly identical set of documents. You were his backup plan. The moment you stopped being the perfect, obedient daughter, this was waiting for you. The color drained from her face as the truth hit her with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't the princess. She was just the spare. In that sterile, white room, the rivalry our parents had engineered for 2 decades finally died. We were no longer just sisters, we were survivors. Beverly's testimony was the key that unlocked everything. When the golden child, the perfect daughter, corroborated my story from her hospital bed, the entire foundation of my father's defense crumbled. The photographs I had taken from the safe gave the police probable cause for a much wider investigation, and what they found was a dynasty rotten to its core. The attempted murder charge was just the beginning. The investigation into the fraudulent conservatorship plot blew the doors off the whole empire. They uncovered decades of embezzlement from the Montgomery Foundation. Money that was publicly earmarked for historic preservation had secretly funded my parents' lavish lifestyle, including a private jet my father had hidden through a shell corporation. They found rampant real estate fraud and tax evasion schemes that ran into the tens of millions. The fall was as swift as it was brutal. The Montgomery name, once a pillar of Savannah society, became a whispered scandal at every country club and charity event. Former friends who once clamored for an invitation to our home now crossed the street to avoid my mother. The legal battle was long and ugly, played out in the headlines of the very newspapers that used to print their society photos. Have you ever had to fight a battle that no one else believed you could win? A fight for your truth, your safety, or your sanity? If you've walked that road, just take a second to hit that subscribe button. This channel is a tribute to the quiet warriors who refused to let the story end on someone else's terms. They had spent their lives building an empire of lies, and it crumbled under the weight of a single, undeniable truth. When the dust finally settled, my father was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, a man consumed by the legacy he had killed to protect. My mother, who testified against him to save herself, received a lesser sentence of 5 years. The grand house on Forsyth Park was seized and sold at auction, its contents liquidated to repay the charities my father had defrauded. With the wreckage of our old life cleared, the $50 million trust our grandfather had left us was finally released. Holding that document, Beverly and I didn't feel triumph. We felt the immense weight of a second chance. We vowed that this money, once a motive for our destruction, would now become a tool for reconstruction. Beverly, finally free from our father's expectations, enrolled at the Savannah College of Art and Design, rediscovering a passion for painting she'd buried as a child. She used her half of the inheritance to establish the Rowan Grant, a foundation in our grandfather's name dedicated to providing financial support to young artists whose families discouraged their creative ambitions. I took my share and founded the Montgomery Rowan Project, a nonprofit that offers free legal aid and trauma therapy to victims of conservatorship abuse and financial coercion within families. My master's degree in social work was no longer just a degree. It was now the cornerstone of my life's mission. We were redefining what the Montgomery legacy meant not in iron and stone, but in freeing others from the very cages we had escaped. But building a new legacy on the foundations of a toxic one is a complex kind of construction. It required more than just money and a mission. It required healing the very architecture of our souls. There were years of therapy, both together and apart. There were nights Beverly would wake up screaming from nightmares about the hospital, and days I would flinch at the sound of a champagne cork popping. We had to learn, painstakingly, how to be sisters without the constant shadow of rivalry our parents had cultivated. We learned to talk without the coded, passive-aggressive language of our mother, and to trust without the transactional conditions of our father. Slowly, painfully, We built the family we were always meant to have, one honest conversation at a time. I realized the greatest revenge wasn't watching my father get led away in handcuffs. That was justice, but it wasn't revenge. The ultimate revenge, the kind that truly heals, was the quiet joy of watching Beverly sell her first painting. It was the grateful letter from a young woman we helped escape a financial conservatorship. The most profound revenge against people who try to control your every move is to live a life of complete and utter freedom, to build a legacy of kindness on the ashes of their cruelty. They may have written the first chapter of my life, but Beverly and I, together, were the authors of all the rest. The journey of healing is never a straight line. It's a spiral. There are days when the ghosts of the past feel distant, like figures in an old, faded photograph. Then there are days when a scent, a turn of phrase, or the clinking of a glass can pull you right back into the heart of the storm. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not a single act of grace extended to those who wronged you. It is the daily act of forgiving yourself for not seeing the signs sooner, for still feeling the ache of a love that was never real. Justice, we discovered, isn't always found in a courtroom verdict. True justice is found in the quiet moments, in the peace of our small apartment, in the shared laughter over takeout dinner, in the freedom to pursue a passion without seeking anyone's approval. The greatest retribution for their calculated cruelty was not their imprisonment, but our liberation. We learned that the poison they tried to give me was nothing compared to the poison of conditional love they'd fed us our entire lives. By choosing to build a life based on authenticity and mutual respect, we broke the cycle. We survived, not just as individuals, but as a family, redefined and reclaimed on our own terms. The Montgomery name no longer represents a fallen empire of lies. It now represents the resilience of two sisters who found their own way home to each other. What's the most valuable lesson a challenging family experience has taught you about yourself or the life you want to build? I would be honored to read your stories in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life stories and share this with someone who needs to hear that family trauma does not have to define your future. Thank you for being a part of this healing journey with me.